So what I think I'll do is just give you a brief overview, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you have. As you know, I'm Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri, and what we did today was something that we've been wanting to do really for the last couple of years, but weren't able to do because of COVID, and that is to test all of the training, the policies, the protocols, the systems that we put in place in Pinellas County over the last few years to address an active assailant situation, especially at a school. There's been a lot of work put into it, a lot of policies developed, a lot of training, a lot of protocols that involve not just law enforcement, but the school district, fire, EMS, and a lot of stakeholders. As you know, we have multiple law enforcement agencies in the county. Everybody works very well together, but when one of these incidents happens, everybody has to come together. So we needed to do this to test it. I think it was a success today. We put stress on the people who were responding. We stressed the system to be able to identify those areas that are good and also areas where there's room for improvement. We're going to debrief everybody that was involved with it, and we're going to produce an after-action report that we can build on to make it stronger and better. The exercise, as you know, is still ongoing. We're at a stage now where, and you'll be able to go over, those of you who hadn't had a chance to do it, to the reunification center. So we did everything from the beginning to the end, from the time, and the scenario in this case was a woman whose husband was a teacher at the school. She suspected him of having an affair with another teacher. She was upset. And as we know, the schools in Pinellas County, the majority, if not all of them, have single points of entry. The only place that she could get in was through the front office area. She arrived, the gate was open, but it was staffed as it should be, and she barged her way through after the staff wouldn't let her through. She had a gun, she went to the classroom, she engaged her husband, there was an oral argument, and she shot him. And then she went throughout the school and shooting kids, and shooting staff members, and shooting other people. She then went out to the playground area, engaged another staff member of the school, engaged in gunfire, was shooting people on the playground, and then she tried to get into another classroom in the back. Staff did the right thing for the school district. They didn't let her in. She then went to another building behind there where she barricaded herself in. So what happens at that point is the incident commander is getting on scene, law enforcement officers are getting on scene, and it's either single officer response, where the first cop that gets there is going in by themselves, or they form what are called contact teams. So in this case, they started forming contact teams. The first contact team that came in was from the Largo Police Department, followed by Pinellas Park, followed by sheriff's deputies, etc., that were coming in. And then one of the contact teams engaged her in that building in the back, engaged in gunfire, and under the scenario, she was killed. At that point, what ends up happening is having to determine, is there more than one shooter? Do we have the shooter? Have we neutralized the threat? Have we got to a point where it's okay to come in and start dealing with the casualties? We got to make sure that there's not another shooter at that point, and we do the best we can. And then we start with the additional people that are coming in, forming what are called rescue task forces, which is a combination of fire, EMS, and law enforcement officers to get the people who are wounded and get them to what we call a CCP, or a casualty collection point. That's what you saw outside, and you saw on the window outside. You all were able to get video of it, and you saw CCP written on the window. That's the casualty collection point. That's where EMS is going in, and they're treating the people and then getting them out to a triage center. From there, EMS would triage and get them to the hospital. And all the people that are being evacuated would get on buses and come here to the reunification center. The reunification center is here today. It's close, just for the purposes of the drill. The reunification center would not be this close in a real situation. It would be much further away. And again, we divide this into the most intense place, which is the hot zone. That's only law enforcement. And then we go out to the cold zone, which is a very safe place, which is where media would be, where reunification would be, where the command post would be, those kinds of things. So we were able to test all of this today. Again, we look forward to sitting down, working with the school district, Superintendent Hendricks, working with all the fire chiefs and other law enforcement, and start planning for the next one, because this is something we need to do on a regular basis to keep growing, keep learning, and make sure we're in the right place. I'll turn it over to Superintendent Hendricks if he has anything that he wants to say, and then we can take any questions that you all have.
Thank you, Sheriff. Kevin Hendricks, Superintendent of Schools. I want to thank Sheriff Gualtieri for his leadership locally and statewide in helping all of us become better at these unfortunate situations. Today, as he mentioned, we have staff here from our school district who volunteered to participate, principals, assistant principals, teachers who are performing as actors today, as well as folks from his division doing that. These types of situations, we all fear them. We don't want to see them in Pinellas County schools, but we must be prepared. And so that's where we are today. Purposely took this time in the summer where we have no events going on in schools. The technical college is closed as our reunification site, but really working through the logistics of this to make sure we can prepare and make sure our students, our families, our staff are safe. Over the course of, it's been, as Sheriff said, now 2 years in getting ready for this date, our staff didn't know what was coming today. We knew the reunification portion was ours, but in terms of what happened and the process and all of those things, we went in surprised so that we could react accordingly with the staff that we have. One of the things that we emphasize in all of these scenarios, and Sheriff shared the actual scenario, is prevention. We have worked a lot with Sheriff and his team on threat assessments, on See Something, Say Something, the Sandy Hook Promise Act, Fortify Florida, and using all of those things that we have so that we never get to this point today. But as we know, whether it's a school, a ballpark, a grocery store, what it might be, we have to be prepared. And so that's why we're here today. Again, can't emphasize enough the collaboration amongst agencies, and thank the Sheriff for getting us to this point.
And one of the things I want the public to know, and I want the parents to know, is that we're doing everything that we can to be as prepared as we possibly can. And that's why we're testing ourselves and trying to find the holes, trying to find the vulnerabilities. And that, for me, is probably the overarching reason for doing something like this, and one of the most important things, because we want to get it right. We want to be 110%, and we want the public to know that we're making every effort to do that, and that we understand that sometimes there's not perfect, but that we're going to test ourselves, and we're going to continue to be introspective, and we're going to continue to be as critical and self-critical as we can so that we get it to the best possible place. And it's important that people know that there's a lot of effort by a whole bunch of people to do that here in this county. And again, the fire departments, EMS, the school district, law enforcement. I mean, there's so much that goes into one of these things, and there's a lot of response here today. You can take what you saw here today and probably magnify it at least fivefold. And that's what it would be in a real incident, in a real situation. We couldn't even get into all of the components of what a real response would be, and you saw the magnitude of it today. So if anybody has any questions for me or for Superintendent Hendricks, happy to answer. Yeah.
Sheriff, right now in the news so vividly is everything that happened at Uvalde and how law enforcement stayed outside that classroom. My first question for you, as a sheriff who's running these drills and putting this kind of thing in place, how do you feel when you watch that as more and more video comes out?
Disgusted by it. I don't know how else to describe it. It leaves a knot in my gut. I'm embarrassed by it for law enforcement, and not just that there was an obvious lack of leadership, a lack of command and control, but how can you have so many cops that sit around that didn't override that and say, you know what, to this Uvalde Unified School police chief who just didn't do what he should have done and taken control of the situation, is get out of my way, I'm going. Is that why do they stay around so long and not act? Why do they listen to this guy? I mean, just the stuff that you saw, the stuff that we all saw. One of the things that sticks in my mind is that one officer who's sitting in the hallway while the shots are ringing out and the kids are screaming, and he's going out using the hand sanitizer. I mean, really? I mean, what is going on? And so, as they say, and it's true, you don't know how somebody's going to react until they're actually tasked with reacting. But the volume of people there, the magnitude of it, and the magnitude of the incompetence is just, it's mind-boggling. So, it's not representative of law enforcement across the country. What you'd like to say in that situation, it's not representative of law enforcement in that area. But, if it's one or two people, that's one thing. But look at the numbers that were there. So they got a problem.
And I guess my second, and you did kind of answer this, but how critical it is then to really act out, charging a classroom, no hesitation. How important is that for those first responding deputies and officers? Yeah, huge. I mean, that's what you got to do, and that's what we do with active assailant training. So, every agency in this county, the sheriff's office and the police departments, put their personnel through active assailant training. But in that active assailant training, you're not injecting into the scenario the stressors that we injected today. So this is important, where you've got casualties, you've got people screaming, you've got wounds, you've got, again, fire EMS components with rescues and forming rescue task forces and trying to get people out. So
you have to put stress on people to simulate it the best you can, to really see how they're going to react and to get them to the best possible reaction point. So yeah, I mean, that's what you have to do, and we do train, but at the end of the day, you got to make this as real as possible to really see what somebody's going to do when they're tasked with responding to the real thing.
Sheriff, I know you said that this is basically 4 years in the making, right? You've been planning this for years, but how did Uvalde kind of influence things, or did you change anything? Did you learn anything from that scenario that went into today?
The answer is no, because we actually, again, have been planning this for a long time. The active planning on this, where people have been meeting weekly and having regular meetings and doing this, we started this really heavily planning it early last December. So this is well before Uvalde. I'll tell you one of the things, though, objectively, that I think that is important for us that we did learn from it, and will be part of the after action and the amended policy that we're going to put out. I'm going to put out a big amended policy, but I'm waiting for the after action on this before we do it. One of the things that is clear is that law enforcement agencies, law enforcement leaders around the state, around the country, in their policies need to make sure they differentiate between an active assailant response and a containment response, and where that line is. And just because the bullets have stopped flying, just because the shooting is not occurring, doesn't mean that it transforms from an active assailant response to a containment response. So a containment response is something you would use in a barricaded subject, in a hostage situation, and those scenarios where nobody is at peril imminently. Those are the situations where you would set a perimeter, you would call for SWAT, you would try and engage negotiators, you would try, those tactics that are more reactive, and that's why we would call it a containment response. But when somebody is shooting, that's the easy one. If the bullets are flying, you're going in. It's where the bullets have stopped. But I think that the clear lesson that if people didn't get it before, that they need to get out of Uvalde, is just because the bullets have stopped doesn't mean it transforms from an active assailant response to a containment or a reactive response. Is that if the bullets have been flying and there's people in there that have been injured by those bullets and they have life-threatening injuries, you need to go. And it doesn't matter. I think that's an objective lesson that necessitates real clarification in everybody's policies to the extent that it wasn't clear before.
What went well today, and what, did you identify anything that...
Yeah, and I think it would be premature to, give you any real constructive feedback on that. I saw some things, but I expected to. If we did this today, and I'm going to stand here in front of you and say, oh, everything's great and perfect, and, then you should be very suspicious of that and very skeptical of it. And what I told our people going into this today is that go in it full throttle, go in it 110%, give it your all, and absolutely don't be afraid of falling down, because you're going to fall down in this, because we're testing stuff that we put in place that we haven't had an opportunity to test. So embrace it, and embrace the mistakes, if you will, or the things that were less than ideal, because we're going to learn from it, we're going to take it to a new level. So sure, I saw things today, and it'll all be part of the after action, but it's all about learning and closing that gap, so when the real thing does happen, we're in the best possible place.
Can you kind of describe the mental impacts this has on, your first responders here? I know it's not a real life situation, but just seeing it play out and knowing it's happened at other schools, kind of talk to me about that impact.
Well, they're all professionals. They're going to react appropriately, but it's certainly something like this is going to strike a chord. I'm sure it did with you all as you were out there and you saw the response, and you saw the deputies going through windows. You saw the firefighters and EMS personnel with the rescue task forces going through windows and carrying out casualties and carrying out those people. And as well as I do from seeing it, you couldn't tell whether that was real or not. Is that it played out just like what you saw and what you guys would cover in Uvalde or Stoneman Douglas or Buffalo or wherever. You couldn't tell the difference. If you were just coming upon this today, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So, certainly it's going to strike a chord with people as they are carrying out those wounded, as they are going into those classrooms. And again, but that's what we wanted to do, because we've got to put some stress on the components, put some stress on the system, but we got to put some stress on the people too.
I have a question for the superintendent.
Yeah, sure.
So being in there today, and I don't know, this might be too specific, but I know security as a whole, there's one point of entry, we saw that. Then there was the wing to the 4 classrooms. That door was unlocked. Is that Are typically those doors always locked? Like, what's the locked door scenario in Pinellas County Schools?
Yeah, without too much specificity, in general, wherever there's students, there's a locked door. And so if there's a door that isn't locked, like a cafeteria, would be because people are coming and going out of there. It's a throughway. So what you saw today, and as the sheriff talked about the stressors, all of the things that we would expect to be in place were in place.
Can someone briefly just go over the kind of protocol for teachers when there is an active shooter in the building, what they typically would be doing?
Yeah, if you were near enough to the building, you would have heard a siren, you would have heard a message. And so a message goes out in all of our schools that alerts all of the staff that there's some sort of danger. It doesn't specifically say what it is, but that there's danger, and that immediately we go into lockdown. And so that's what you saw today, was you heard that. That response goes on for a few minutes, and then it goes into lockdown, and as law enforcement comes in and takes over.
And lockdown, because there was a scenario where the shooter was trying to get in, help, I need help. So teachers and students are trained, even if someone is on that door screaming, I need help, you don't open.
That's correct. And as Sheriff said, he called it stressors. What we want to not have is complacency. We do training all the time, and one of the reasons why we're doing this now is we know school year is coming up, and we're going to be training all of our staff as we start the year again, and we want to see those things that we get used to, and that's a good example of what you just said, right? The natural response might be to go out and help somebody, but you have to follow your training, and that's part of what we wanted to see today. And so we had all the folks in those buildings were teachers, were school board employees who could respond, not knowing what the situation was going to be.
Is this going to be an ongoing training scenario, or what's the plan for the future?
Yes is the answer. We're going to keep doing these, and for us, some of them will be in the schools in conjunction with the schools. But from a law enforcement, fire, EMS perspective, these don't always happen in the schools. So we're going to continue to do these. I hope that we can do another one maybe sometime after the first of the year. For the school district, it's really not feasible to do them other than during the summer when school's not in. So I hope that we can maybe do another one, maybe someplace else outside of the schools, and maybe come back this time next year and do another one with the schools, with the lessons learned, a little bit different environment, throw some twist into it. No, we're going to keep doing it. Again, the only reason why we haven't done it up to this point was because of COVID. It's essential. If you're not testing yourself and you're not testing what you've put in place, you're not there. Because you need the assurances that it works, and you got to keep pushing it. Again, to make sure that we're comfortable and that the public's comfortable that we're doing the best we can.
For Superintendent, question. It's a necessary kind of evil today, but how does it make you feel seeing a school, under your jurisdiction have to go through something like this, even in a practice drill? How does that kind of make you feel?
I think every educator is sickened by any scene that they see at a school. I think for me, probably the first time I saw that was Columbine. And many people my age probably had the same reaction. And so every time you see that, after that, you're sickened, you're mad, you're angry, you say, how could this happen? So today it wasn't like that because we're doing something to prevent those things. We're doing something to mitigate those things. It was, as the sheriff said, seeing all of the folks there that could help to not make these things happen or make these things stop sooner. So it was reassuring to see all the support, all the logistics go in to making something like this less likely to happen in Pinellas County, and to kind of make sure that we're all prepared in every way we can be.
And Sheriff, you said obviously the point is to test yourselves and push yourselves, but was there any one particular part of this scenario that you were extra focused on making sure that things were carried out in a certain way, or is just the whole thing?
No, it's really the whole thing. Really the whole thing in general. It's all important. But overarching any one of these situations is stopping the harm as soon as you possibly can. I mean, that has to be hands down, unequivocally, the number one priority, because you got to stop the shooting. And we know these events happen very fast. So at Stoneman Douglas, and I think you all have heard me say this before, but 3 minutes and 51 seconds. And think about that. 3 minutes and 51 seconds, 34 people shot in or killed. is that it's such a short amount of time. So you got to stop it immediately. And one person shot or killed is better than 34. So you got to end it. And this is what I really want to see overarching this is that we are in a position with responding law enforcement that we end it as quickly as possible. Everything else is important, but it gets worse unless you stopped it. And so that's why single officer response, the contact teams, everything that we're doing to get in there and stop the threat. If I had to say that there was one thing that is at the height of importance, it's that. Now the other thing too, and you asked this, and I want to touch on this a little bit just briefly, is that with staff and with the teachers, and the teachers are vital. They're absolutely important, and the teachers to lock down, etc. But especially in a school like this, in an elementary school and middle schools especially, they're the ones that are there, and I think that the school district here is doing a great job with training the teachers, with the drills, and with the instruction. But they have a role, they have decisions to make, because we talk about lockdown. Sometimes locking down isn't the best thing to do. In getting those kids, as we call them, in the safest, every room that you're in has the safest area in the room. The phrase kind of got coined, I guess, after Stoneman Douglas called it hard corners. Where you get into it's really the safest place. So the teachers are vital to instructing those kids to get into that safest place and to not let anybody in and to provide the instruction to the students. Again, law enforcement, our absolute essential main priority is to stop that threat.
The future drills, will you do the same kind of thing with the media and the big setup, or will, as you do more of them, they become more internalized and you guys will?
Well, drills have been required since then Governor Rick Scott signed Senate Bill 7026 on March 9th of 2018. Is that drills have been done in every Florida school on a monthly basis. And with some of these too, with some of the things that we're doing, I embrace the media's involvement in these things to the extent we can. I think it's healthy for everybody and good for the public to know. We also have to be very careful, though, that we're not telegraphing and flagging what's being done, because there are people out there that would use that to our disadvantage to their advantage. So we do need to be careful with exactly what we're doing so that we don't create a situation where they are reacting to the strategies that are in place. So as far as the drills are concerned, probably not. But as we do more of these exercises, we'll certainly engage the media.
And Sheriff, one last question. What's your feeling knowing that it's gotten to the point where this is going to have to be a regular training at schools?
The unfortunate reality is, and anybody that doesn't accept this is just not being realistic, is that it is going to happen again. The question is when and where. But really the most important question is that what are we doing differently than we were doing before to mitigate the harm? So when you accept that premise, and you have to if you're being intellectually honest, we all want prevention. We should strive for prevention. We should put things in place for prevention. One of the greatest opportunities of prevention is threat management, the threat assessment teams. But it's not going to be 100%. So when you accept the premise that it is going to happen again, the question is when and where. What are you doing differently? And you just hope that it's not in your area of responsibility. Then all of this falls into place, and it's an absolute necessity, and it is part of life. It's not going away. The culture has changed. The dynamics changed. This is something that's going to be part of law enforcement, first responders, and the schools forever. Think about this, is that you got kids now that have graduated from high school that have done drills, active assailant drills, their whole high school education career, that are now in college, et cetera, that are going back to be teachers probably in some cases, in the near future. So you've got a whole generation now that just, this is going to become the norm. I think it has to become the norm, unfortunately. But if not, we're missing the mark.
Sheriff, when do you expect the report and analysis to be wrapped up?
Well, I can't give you a specific time frame but I'm hoping in about 30 days or so. I want to do it sooner rather than later so that we can learn from it. So I'm hoping, some of the first debriefing sessions begin tomorrow. So we're getting on it over the next week or so, and there's a lot that goes into that. But I hope within about 30 days or so. All right, thanks everybody.